week on our scheduled time, and that was just a scheduling issue that we had. I was traveling back last week to Columbus, and so it just makes it tough. So I appreciate you guys being flexible. Obviously, we'll get the recording out. If you guys want the slides, please email me at troy@marshhomegroup.com and we can get those slides to you. But I'm going to go ahead and jump in if no one else has anything specific. But also feel free to interrupt as always.
I'll interrupt since we have a short group.
Yep.
One thing that I'm noticing, especially because all of the properties, well, I have two trailers right now, but my property's over 100,000. What I'm noticing is clients don't care as much about the upgrades. They'd rather pay even average price per square footage for a house than a premium square footage for all the update upgrades, which is interesting because when I was working with Tim Reel in the past, he was telling his custom builders to put in all the features because people want to pay for the upgrades. And I feel like what I've been noticing in this market, at least with mine, is they don't want to pay for the upgrades. They'll pay less per square foot for without upgrades than more per square foot with all the upgrades, which is completely different than the pool thing. But just an interesting thing I've noticed over these past few weekends with my listings.
So let me ask you a question on that. That's a great, love that. Do you find that is that across all price points, or are you seeing that like for example, the pool thing that was a nine, I think we were at nine and change, 925, something like that. Do you find like what we would typically consider to be like either close to luxury or luxury to be really focused on those upgrades, but then like your like first time buyer to second time buyer, let's call it like your 350 to 750 or 700, where they're being more price conscious, or you feel like it's across the board upgrades matter less?
That is such a great point, and you hit the nail on the head. I believe the luxury buyer in the 800 and up is still looking for those upgrades. They want to justify that price. Mine are between 499 and 600. So
Yeah.
we're the second time kind of move up family. And I guess it makes sense because probably when they bought was a sub 3% rate. And now they're going to their second home and they've probably done everything to their first home in terms of renovations, new HVAC. They probably already paid all the things and they don't see the value in something that they could do themselves with a different, more custom finish for what they prefer. So you make a really good point. I am probably in the second time homeowner market where they're not as the upgrades aren't important to them.
Hilda is here from Silicon Valley and she's drooling over our prices, I think. She said four walls and a roof is 1.9 there, and in order to get something decent, so yeah, Hilda, your 3.5 million is our 350,000. But no, I think that that's definitely the case, and that's what is interesting. Hilda, you can unmute anytime, by the way. Feel free. Um,
Okay, I have to ask because I think I'm the lone wolf out here. And I love to jump on calls in different areas of the country to understand the market conditions because we all have investors and we have a tsunami of the graybeards that are now looking to move their money around the country in order to go from appreciation market to a cash flow market. So, what do the rents look like in your area? If you have some time to address that, I'd really like to know what would something that's 350,000. So that's the upper end and that's new construction, I take it, maybe something that's 5 years new.
no, so 350 is definitely not the upper end. I mean,
Oh,
our
that's the medium.
yeah, that would be, I mean, I would say in most of our like attractive suburban school district markets, like your 400 to 500 is your entry point. So that's
Okay.
like going to be your smallest single family, not really updated, but livable.
Okay.
And then the rent on that in like let's call it a 1,500 to 1,800 square foot single family. In that price range, your rent is probably 21 to 2,400. Um,
Yeah, that's not bad because that's probably our very low first time home buyer market, which here is between 1.12 to 1.3, and but the rents are like $5,000 a month on average. I would say probably four to five, 4.5 to 5,000, depending on what utilities. And that is, probably schools that are not beyond an 8. They would probably be in the 5 to 7 at the top end of the range. Um, so those are decent rents if you got a good down payment.
Yeah, they're decent rents. I would say, just like most areas in the country, rents have definitely not caught up completely to where they were versus pricing pre-pandemic. We appreciated on the sales price a lot more over the last 4 years or 5 years than we did on rents. But rents are slowly catching up as the prices here have definitely not fallen in most areas, but they've definitely leveled off to more average appreciation, and we'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, we have lots. I actually own a property management company as well, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to dig deeper with you in that. But we have a lot of investors coming to Columbus from California for sure. We have a lot of tech here. Not as much as you do in Silicon Valley, obviously, not as much as Austin, but I would say we're for most people thought of as like the tech hub of the Midwest now, with the amount of data centers, and we have an Intel fab going in, and a few other bigger companies that have decided to plant their flag here. And so it's definitely a popular investment location for people in markets like yours.
That's good to know. And I wanted to I I'm a total geek and I absolutely love AI because it's just giving me so much access to information that I've always wanted to be able to drum up in seconds. So last night I was reviewing my portfolio, and the reason why is because, when there was a lot of shakeup with obviously the war and change in administration. And so there's been a lot of volatility. And for us in Silicon Valley, that volatility in the stock market really affects, people making moves because most of them don't I mean, they earn a decent salary, but most of their down payments are coming from RSUs and coming from the amazing sums of money that they've made in the stock market. And so I just asked Gemini Pro yesterday. I said, evaluate these four companies for me. And I know that they were all outstanding performers. I said, if you would have taken and made an investment of $50,000 in each one of these companies in 2022, and I knew that they all had splits, give me a comparison of the valuations and growth. And it was just absolutely incredible. If you would have invested $50,000 in NVIDIA just 5 years ago in 2022, your stock valuation would be worth $624,000 today. Broadcom was, I believe, $50,000. They were all 50,000. I just picked one number that I knew you could go and get a second on your house and pull the money down and plop
Sure.
it in. And it was Broadcom, and I believe that was 458,000 valuation. And the other that I used was Google Alphabet, and 50,000 would bring you 178 $1,000 to 190, depending on when you bought your original
Yeah. Hey,
shares.
Hilda, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but we're 15 minutes in already and I've
Oh,
got a
I'm
bunch of
sorry.
slides. No, that's
Okay.
okay.
But I
So
wanted
I'm
to
gonna,
share as a comparison, so you know where people are getting their money from. And I think it's wise for us as real estate professionals to take a look at those things and use them as potential options to grow our wealth as well.
no, absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
Go ahead.
So all right, let's jump in. All right, you guys, I think most of you guys know about me, but like I said, I'm an investor, property manager, been an agent here in Columbus since '04. Today we're gonna go over kind of the normal stuff that we usually do. But as always, I've got a couple interesting slides with some unique perspective. But I also will always repeat this to you guys is I'm a data nerd, and I know a lot of you on this call also share my love for numbers. But on the flip side, if you're not a numbers person and you're on here just to try to, gain a little bit of value, I would encourage you pick one or two things and know it well. You do not have to know all of this to be a great agent, and just knowing one or two of these things will go a long ways in setting yourself apart amongst your peers. Unfortunately, I wish more people in our industry paid more attention to this, because I think sometimes we do too much emotional selling and not enough selling based on fact. And I do think that right now we're definitely in more of a skills-based market than we were for the couple kind of COVID years. And I think a lot of you that are on this call are having success because you are using facts and you're paying attention to trends and different things like that. And your sellers especially, but buyers also are winning because of it. So kudos to you guys. All right, really quick mortgage rates. Obviously, those have been a huge story. You can see where we started off at the beginning of the war. We were down here at that 6% range. Everybody was super excited. We had a couple highlight or headlines for not a couple headlines. We had lots of headlines for a week or two talking about rates finally dipping below 6% for the first time in a long time. And then basically, like the next weekend, the war started and we haven't really gone back. We still are quite a ways below where we were last year at this time. It's hard to believe, but we were up, closer to 7%. Unfortunately, here over the last couple days, we're up to 6.6. So we're not as far off as we had been for the majority of the last 12 months. But we'll go into kind of what's going into those numbers here in a second. But I know we were all pretty optimistic that we would stay around 6, maybe even a little less than that prior to the start of the war. At this point, I would be shocked if we were at 6 anytime before, the end of the year, unless everything just abruptly ends and returns to absolute normal very quickly. And I'll explain why in a second. This is the biggest reason. So I have a couple slides here. Last month, I created this using Claude, which was awesome. When you speak to AI, Hilda, it's just amazing. Like I can type in, give me a chart that compares oil prices to mortgage rates, and it created this for me. It even added all these like labels that like marking the important things that happened during that time frame. And basically, the biggest thing that we want to point out here that happened over the last 30 days since we last met is we saw like basically where everybody got extremely optimistic at the beginning of May that we had come to a peace deal. You can see that oil prices tanked basically overnight. Interest rates had a lot of downward pressure on them compared to earlier in the month. But then, as people realized that maybe peace talks or the peace plan wasn't going to come to fruition, everything has slowly kind of risen again. The other thing that happened with interest rates, you can see that there's been a delta between oil prices and interest rates, but then not completely unrelated in any way, but the April CPI came out. That's Consumer Price Index. That's basically a measure of inflation. And obviously, we all knew that higher oil prices were eventually going to lead to inflation. I don't think everybody was optimistic, maybe would be the right word, that it wouldn't impact it this quickly, but they were realistic from the perspective that it probably would, and that showed. And so the increase in the inflation definitely coming to fruition, kind of pushed interest rates up, and now they're continuing to go up, largely because of the interest rate conversation. If you look down here, we also had a new Fed chairman that got confirmed, I guess we could call it, by the Senate last week. And I think he'll be sworn in. I think I saw a headline today on Friday. Um, but apparently, historically, when a new Fed chairman comes in, the bond market kind of pushes him to see how he's going to react, he or she. And so interest rates going up in the short term after a Fed chairman gets elected or confirmed or appointed. However, it's not technically elected, but confirmed or appointed, is not uncommon. So we'll see how he handles it. This is somebody that came in. Obviously, he was nominated by Trump, and he came in kind of saying that he felt like productivity gains from AI were going to be a reason that he could lower rates. But now, with inflation doing what it's doing, most people say that that's probably not going to be able to happen. Historically, prior to like recently, he was pretty hawkish, which means he was usually for higher rates, which is interesting that Trump still nominated him, even though he wanted lower rates. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles everything happening right now. I don't have a slide for it, but I just saw a headline that Meta is laying off, I don't know how many, but a number of employees, and citing the reason for that is improvements in productivity from AI. So it'll be very interesting to see how Kevin Warsh handles the idea that we're having more inflation, but we're also becoming more productive, and we also have a very low unemployment rate still. So it'll be interesting. This graph just goes all the way back to the beginning of the conflict or war, whatever you want to call it, with Iran. But you can see kind of oil prices and interest rates were very low. Back here at the end of February, and then um, basically shot up and peaked. We're still not back at the peak, but we are very close today. So we'll keep an eye on that stuff. Consumer confidence continues to head in the wrong direction, like we had been talking about all year. It was slowly getting better. And then now, obviously, with the conflict, I don't think there's ever been a war where people got more excited about the future during the middle of a war. So this is definitely not something that was unexpected, but certainly, not good for political poll numbers. And then you can see the same thing here. Consumers expect prices to go up. The dotted lines represent the month over month change, and then the blue lines represent like the 3 month average. So as you would expect, the month over month change is more dramatic than the average. So again, we're expecting people are feeling less confident about the economy and more confident that prices are going to go up, which makes them less confident in the economy. Um, Kendra, this kind of talks to what you were talking about, but basically this is like the percentage of people, which is right over here, that are concerned about higher prices. And you can see that people that hold fewer stocks are more likely to be concerned about high prices than people that do hold stocks. In this particular questioning, they're using holding stocks or not as a reflection of wealth, basically. So basically, what they're saying is that the more wealthy people that have more stocks get less concerned about the increase in prices. Yeah, Hilda, actually, it looks like the 10 year is down here in the last couple minutes. Um, the And then Hilda, yeah, I should have done a slide on this, Hilda, but yeah, Logan does a great job on it. But also, they're saying that the spreads are the tightest they've been between the 10 year and the 30-year mortgage, 10-year treasury and the 30-year mortgage. And that if the spreads were the same as they were like in 2022 and 2023, we'd be at over 8% on the mortgage rates right now. So it's pretty wild that they're as low as they are, given what the 10 year has done. All right, this was just kind of a cool slide that I found from National Association of Realtors, but it was the number of people that were buying in all cash and then comparing that to first-time home buyers. So if we go all the way back to the 2008 crisis, for those of you that weren't in the market back then, there was a first time buyer tax credit where if you were a first time buyer, you basically got $7,500 in free money, um, for if you bought a house, which was pretty amazing, if you were a first time buyer during that time. And so at that point, our first percentage of the market that were first time buyers peaked up to 50%. So half of the buyers in the total market were first timers. And then that's dropped all the way down last year to 21% of the market. And that's largely due to affordability. And at the same time, though, you have more all cash purchases than at any time since 2000, at least. I don't know how far back we have records of that, but right now, compared to 2020 or 2001, we have more than twice as many cash transactions as back then. So, very, very interesting time. Um, we don't have a ton of time, so I'm not going to dig too deep into this, but this is basically CPI went up by a lot, but I just saw this article last week, which I thought was interesting. And they said basically because of the government shutdown in the fall, that the month over month shelter inflation actually is higher than it would have been otherwise. So it came in at 0.6%. But if we had not had a government shutdown, it would have only been 0.3%. So I say all that to say it'll be interesting. And because shelter inflation accounts for 40% of core inflation, core CPI, and 36% of regular CPI, it can have a pretty big impact. So it'll be interesting. Everybody kind of assumed that inflation went up a ton because of gas prices, but it looks like, at least from what this article was saying, that a large amount of that could have been the fact that the government shutdown happened and that data got pushed out to April. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the May numbers next month. All right, nationally, active listings. We're definitely seeing a trend where the number of new listings, or the number of active listings on the market is not increasing at the same rate that it normally does. So even though we are up 4.6% year over year for April, you can see kind of if the same trend line continues, we should fall below last year in terms of overall inventory. I know out here in Colorado, we're just simply seeing people either take their house off the market or just not list at all. So the number of new listings is down quite a bit, which we'll see in a second when we look at different regions. Um, New listings, though, right after I get done saying that, the active listings are starting to trend down. The new listings are still in a decent place. They're slightly over last year, but we're just not like we're not holding on to as much of the inventory. Either it's getting purchased or it's falling off and getting taken off the market. So we'll continue to watch that. Um, Pendings were just barely up. You can see how they've come down. So after being really excited at the beginning of the year that pendings and sales were going to increase a lot, both realtor.com, actually, or not realtor.com, but NAR, as well as pretty much everybody that makes predictions came out over the last couple weeks and kind of revised their forecasts down in terms of the total sales for the year, which is a bummer. But whenever we have major things happen, like the war during the time of the year during the spring season, it's pretty common that it's hard to make sales records when your strongest time of the year is impacted with negative news. Days on market is up 2 days year over year, but again, it seems to be normalizing. And if we look at the trend line actually compared to last year, between March and April, it looks like we're going to be in a better spot. Um, Possibly might dip below the 2025 days here in the next couple months. Year on year list prices. So after like being, I mean, you can see that you can't even tell the difference between the colors here over the last 3 years. They were like on an exact trajectory. Now this year is pretty consistently below, not crazy, but 1.4%. And that's at a list, that's the average list price, so not the average sales price. The percentage of properties with price reductions remains elevated, but it is lowering compared to last year. So, in my opinion, this is an indication that sellers are getting more realistic. And also, hopefully, you guys are getting better at pricing. There were a lot of agents that entered the market during the COVID years when things were crazy and you could just slap a price on it and it would sell no matter what. And I think, like I said at the beginning, skills-based market has definitely become more important, or your skills in the market from a pricing perspective. So regionally, like I said, in the West, we're seeing fewer new listings. Active counts are still up everywhere compared to last year. Um, but you can see the West has actually negative year over year number for new listings. The South, just barely above zero. And then we're still doing fairly well on new listings in the Northeast and the Midwest comparatively. But price reduced share, like we talked about, is dropping pretty much everywhere. I'm gonna sneeze here in a second. Excuse me. Um, so yeah, that's what I've got on this. All right, what's happening in Central Ohio? So I moved the slides around a little bit this month because I felt like the months of supply is a good conversation to have. So obviously we're still a little bit above last year in April, but the trend line is down, which I think is very important. Again, I think we've seen this to some extent as we talked about at the beginning with the amount of offers that we're getting on a lot of our listings, especially the most competitive ones. Um, and so this is something to keep an eye on. Obviously, if we start to see this tick up as interest rates tick up, then this is something that should show that pretty quickly. But if we continue to see kind of this downward trend, I would expect that we'll continue to see competitive market. New construction is the same kind of thing. I think that the biggest driver with new construction is that the builders have really slowed building across the nation. Obviously, these numbers are a little bit more difficult to gather locally. Not impossible, but I'm just not willing to pay what it costs to get the information. But I would say the general trend of builders is just fewer starts. And so that's impacting the months of supply. And remember, that's also just what's on the MLS. And so, they definitely do have some stuff that's not on the MLS. Um, Days on market, we're still a little bit above last year, so 4 days above last year, but we did trend down quite a bit from March to April. Ironically, the exact same number of days as last year, just different starting points and ending points. But the other thing that we always like to see, we had dipped all the way down to 95% of the original list price on the average sales price. Now we're back up to 98, which is where we were last year at this time. So we're definitely seeing homes sell for at or near list price again and more quickly. So all right, local market. Again, because of that low months of inventory, we're still continuing to see like the number of pendings kind of grow at the same angle as the number of new listings. So it's really difficult for us to get a lot more sales at this point, given, 1.6 months of inventory. It's hard to gain a lot of inventory if you're not getting a lot more new listings. So again, new listings are up 10%, which is really good from a market perspective. But our pendings are basically staying right in line and essentially eating up all of those new listings for the most part. So our gap, I think we've talked about this the last couple months, but you can see the gap last year between the number of new listings and the number of pendings in that month. You can see that that gap is much smaller this year. So that's good for overall sales here in Central Ohio, but it's not really going to allow us to build inventory, I don't think, unless something changes going into summertime like we did last year. So I would anticipate that we're going to see a tighter market in the summer and fall this year than we saw last year, where we saw a decent amount of softness, I would say. If we dive into some local school districts, we're seeing all the same thing. I mean, look at the gap between new listings and pendings last year and look at the gap this year. So we're definitely seeing more buyers in the market and buyers willing to pull the trigger. Um, Again, we do have more than 1 month of inventory, which we went through many years. Like even last year, we had a tighter gap in terms of months of inventory in the spring, but then that widened quite a bit as we got more new listings and didn't eat those up with buyers. So we'll see how things go. But look at the pendings up 51%. So I'm anticipating, even though April saw a year over year increase, I would be shocked if May doesn't show a year over year increase in sales. New construction, again, we're seeing new listings down, and then the solds, at least from the MLS on new construction, are down 39%. Again, it's not a total picture since it's just on the MLS, but something to look at. Hilliard seeing exactly the same thing. I guess a little bit more of a gap, but not much of one between new listings and pendings. In Hilliard, we're definitely seeing a much tighter market. So inventory is up technically by 29%. You can see last year in April, we were basically out of 1 month of inventory. This year, we have a little bit more. But yeah, the Hilliard market remains very strong, actually, from a numbers perspective, a little stronger than Dublin. Um, and maybe it's new construction, right? New listings and new construction in Hilliard were about the same, but solds were up 320% compared to last year. So that's pretty wild. Again, that's only on the MLS. So that number is a lot more exciting than when I say 16 more new builds sold in Hilliard last month than April of last year. But that's how you can play with numbers and make things look better than they really were. Olentangy, same conversation with new listings and pendings, but this kind of split here in April is something that we definitely want to keep an eye on. New listings also were down year over year, which this was one of the only markets that we saw that showed that. But pendings were still up, so I would suspect that solds would also be up. If we look at new construction, they were up slightly on the solds and down slightly on the new listings. So again, you can see all of this inventory that we had in the new construction market last fall You can see that shrinking quickly and also fewer new listings. Again, I feel like the new construction market really like was a great place to go for those lower interest rates last year in the fall when rates were still kind of high. Um, it doesn't look like we're going to have those same opportunities once the builders work through their current inventory. If anything, I think we could be in a situation where we start to see the builders move back into more of a negotiating position if the inventory continues to shrink this way. So if you have new construction buyers out there, I would strongly consider um, taking advantage of the promotions now because they may not be as good later in the year if this inventory shrinks. We've pretty much gone over all that stuff. Um, Quick thing to keep in mind here, the gap between list price and sales price is still pretty tight um, compared to what it was last year. You can also see that we are up quite a bit. So our average sales price is still 4.7% above a year ago. But the active prices are only up 0.2%. So that can be telling us one of two things. Either you guys are getting better at your pricing and the sellers are getting more realistic, or that's a leading indicator to say like that maybe year over year pricing might start to level off. I think when we look at national numbers, usually the list price is a pretty good indication of what's going to happen with sales price. We haven't seen that same correlation here locally yet, but it's certainly something that we want to keep an eye on. But year over year prices being up by 4.7 is definitely a good trend because that's certainly not the case in many other markets in the U.S. So it continues to show kind of our resilience as one of the stronger, larger housing markets in the US. All right, here's one of my favorite graphs, and Allison's still on here. Every week she gets all excited about this graph, so thank you for building this for us. So this is again based on showing time data. Last week we got a little bit nervous with that drop, so we're the red line here this year. But you can see this past week, we popped right back up. So in terms of total showings in the market over the last, what is that, 5 years, we are right at number two now behind 2022. And honestly, for those of you that were in the market back in 2022, you remember the trend was way down. At this point, and interest rates were on the upswing in a major way. The market was slowing very quickly. And so again, I think there's a chance that our total showings, if the market continues the way it is right now, we could be above the trend line, including 2022 here pretty soon. So overall, I would say showings overall have been stronger this year as a whole. We've seen a lot less fluctuation even on the holiday weeks. So keep that in mind. I still would not recommend, as I always tell you guys, do not list your house next weekend if you don't have to on Memorial Day weekend. Or actually, that's this weekend, if you can avoid it. But if you have to, again, I would say that the holidays have been less impactful this year. We've seen traffic, even Easter is historically one of the biggest dips. And we saw one, actually, I think it's the smallest change from week to week on Easter weekend this year that we've seen since we started tracking this data. So, again, I wouldn't write home about it. It seems like the number of showings has been pretty rock solid in terms of being very low on Memorial Day weekend. Now, this year, Memorial Day weekend's a week early because June 1st is on a Monday. And so, again, it'll be interesting. This is something we don't have in our data, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens here, but always an interesting piece of information. And then our showings per listing, though, so overall showings are still really good. Unfortunately, the overall showings are higher because you guys are just showing each buyer more houses. It's not because each listing is actually getting more showings. So our average listing got just above 3 showings on average this week. And again, that's lower than it's been, a little bit, tiny bit higher than last year, but still quite a bit lower than 2024. All right, we're almost done here on purchase and refi numbers, really to do with mortgage applications. They're actually holding decently. I like to look at purchases because obviously, if you're a loan officer, maybe you care about the composite index of both refis and purchases. Um, because rates are still, believe it or not, lower than they've been the last couple years, refinance applications have still been up, but you can see even purchase applications. This is in spite of much higher inflation, in spite of rising interest rates. We're still year over year seeing a net increase in purchase applications nationally. And so definitely kind of bucking the trend, I would say. Um, so we'll continue to keep an eye on those. This is the oldest slide, and I just can't get rid of it. But you guys know I talk about it every month. But ultimately, I just have this up here because the number of buyers in the market is way lower than it has been historically. And the number of sellers, frankly, is also way lower than it has been historically. And I still believe if we saw any kind of sustained period below 6% with mortgage rates, that we would see the excess inventory that we have disappear overnight, and we would go back into, I think in many areas in Columbus, we're still in a pretty strong seller's market, but we would go back into like a 2021 type seller's market pretty quickly. And I think that's true in many areas of the country, not all, many. We're still just below average on buyers and sellers. And I think the second that the gap between everybody's existing rates and the rate they can get today gets reasonably close, we're going to see a pretty big flood of new listings. And then average rents, unfortunately, the most boring number ever. Literally fluctuating for the last year plus between like within a $20 to $30 range. Um, so nothing exciting here. I mean, I would say your average tenant is fine, increasing by somewhere between 2 and 4% year over year, because obviously it costs them to move to a new place and it costs the owners to turn it over. So everybody, for the most part, prefers to stay where they're at. I would say the biggest downward pressure on rents right now continues to be the larger multifamily projects that are coming online, especially the Class A stuff is just having a lot of problems moving. Um, but yeah, overall rents, I would say the market in Columbus is very, very um, level, and it's not like overly strong in either direction. So I would say maybe balanced is the right word. It's the springtime though, so a lot of our places, even if they have been vacant for a couple months, are renting right now. So that's also the trend that you like to see, is that seasonality works. When seasonality is broken, that's even more of a concern. But we're seeing, a lot of the vacancies fill. For us, we're working towards filling really quickly, which is our internal goal, and we're having a lot of success getting people moved in pretty quickly once they become available. So, yeah, that's that. Source wise, pretty much the same sources that I'm always used to using. So, with that, what do you guys got for me? Any other comments, questions, concerns?
I
No?
do. I do. I'm
All
here,
right.
Troy.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna unmute and unvideo myself because I am going through it and this is evidence. Um I just put I feel like I'm gonna cry. I'm so upset right now. I just put a text out to my coaching group. I coach with Dan DeMott.
Yep.
So over the weekend, and this is, I am curious, everybody else on the call, I have had more nastiness from sellers. It's like the more I'm willing to do and the more I follow up. Like I do listing updates on Monday. I subscribe with homes.com, so I pay the premium. I schedule the send to them so they get all of the analytics, and then I follow up with an email and say, "Hey, I just want you to know X, Y, or Z from the analytics. Let me know if you have any questions." And then I report on how many showings and what their feedback is. I had a seller this weekend tell me, quote, "I feel like you're giving me really bad realtor advice." Um, Ironically, we're in contract now. So there's that. And then while we were on this call, a client of mine said, "What do I need to do to switch realtors?" And like, I just, I don't know. Is anybody else seeing that? I feel like I mean, I am calm. I'm always thorough. I explain things. I don't know what it is right now. I feel like I'm getting beat up.
Daniel turned his camera on, so I'm gonna let him answer first.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a little bit. I mean, I just had a client call me this morning and tell me that she's buying a house in a flood zone. And we didn't realize this until the bank said that she needs to have flood insurance. And she proceeded to call me and asked why I didn't know and why the seller didn't disclose it and like berate me on what ChatGPT told her to ask me. And I said, I cannot answer these because I don't know the answers to them. So, all that to be said, I think there's something out in the waters, but I think,
Literally in your case, in the floodwaters.
oh yeah, literally. Didn't even catch that. But yeah, I don't know. I think something's out in the waters right now. Who knows?
I have some thoughts, but I'm curious on what everybody else thinks before I give my opinion.
I'll also add that this is the first time in my life I have 11 listings and 7 buyers in contract. So it could just be my it's more frequent now because I have this booming volume, which could also be a testament to how hard I've been working. And maybe just because I have what's 11 plus 7, 18 things in contract, that having one nasty gram and one person that wants to leave me, maybe that's just not a big deal. And I need to go put makeup on and quit bitching and crying at home.
Also, to add to that too, I did just have another one tell me how to do my job. And I think it all stems from, which I realized and I took accountability for, it was the fact that I didn't do a buyer consult with them. I did an over phone buyer consult with them. It just, the timing of the things of how it worked, it was referral. So I mean, I dealt with it more carefully than I would just like a regular lead, coming from someone that I trust heavily. And they wanted to see the house tomorrow. So we kind of did it over the phone buyer consult. And in between that and getting into contract with that house, um, I realized they were doing things that were very like not typical buyer behavior. And that includes scheduling 10 um, appointments with people to get quotes and inspections done within the first 5 days of being in a contract. Shout out to Brittany Cox on that because she was a trooper. But I think it came from me not setting the expectation. So I reevaluated. I had a coming to Jesus moment with them. I brought termination paperwork and I brought a gift. So, we were going to either split in one or two ways. So I think it maybe kind of I had to sit with myself for a minute and self reflection and realize, you know what? I don't think I set the expectations good enough here. I don't know what your case is. It sounds like you're doing a lot and you might have a lot on your plate. And it just like, oh, I totally forgot about it. I don't know. But that's awesome that you have that much. Congrats.
Thanks. On the contrary, I have buttoned up everything. Um, I don't know if you guys know about my stalker incident, but I have a podcast out there and I talked about this stalker thing and then something else bad happened. I can't remember what it was. And then I physically stepped on a snake. And it was like, and this was probably 6 weeks ago at this point, and it was just like I felt like I kept having these wake up calls to get detailed, to get focus. And I have two admins. I have got it together. And again, I think I've realized through talking that maybe it is my volume and these two things. Full transparency, the one guy that wants to fire me is one of my trailers. So like my sister's been telling me lately, bless and release. Like bless and release. So I think that is my answer. But Daniel, you have a really good point. Like maybe even though I know that I've got it buttoned up, maybe it is still just doing, maybe if something's been on the market for a few weeks, like, hey, let's have a phone call and let's reset our expectations because the market is shifting. So just continually checking in, not just sending the Monday updates, not just sending the listings, but maybe peeling back the onion and checking in on expectations since things are a little different.
And I think to follow up on that too is like one thing that I found that is really helpful in my business is I actually follow up twice a week. So I do a Friday follow up and then I call them on Tuesdays and ask them like, how is it going for you on your end? And that's kind of like where the emotional part comes into play. But on Fridays, I send them an email and say, this is everything that has happened this week. And going into this week, and I'm looking to achieve this, this, and this. And then on Tuesday, I call them and say, hey, did you get the email? What did you think about it? Do you guys have any questions from this weekend? This is what feedback was like this weekend. This is what the open house has brought. Um, I think right now, I think Troy had it in his presentation a couple months ago that like we're going into a market that's skill based and people want to hear from us more. And I think even Dana just says it regularly that like our clients want to hear from us every day if they could. Now, God forbid, I don't want to talk to every client every day. But I do make sure that every Tuesday and every Friday, I do personally reach out to them and see if they need anything. Um, but everyone's different.
No, I think that's a good point because I have been dialed in on the process and the logistics, but maybe what I'm leaving behind is that like emotional support. Like I went over and helped my one of my clients stain their stairs yesterday and I know she really appreciated that. And it was like a Sunday night. I came over with a trash can, gloves, three different stains, tack cloth. Um she is my kid's babysitter, but I think that was appreciated. And that wasn't just listing prep. That was like, hey girl, it's Sunday night. Like I know you're losing it. Let me come over and stain your stairs.
That sounded funny. I'm gonna jump in here because we're getting close to two and just give you my like. First of all, it's awesome when you talk through this stuff because the cool thing is that you solved your own problem. You really didn't need to ask any of us. And uh, I agree with like Daniel, you hit it on the head, and I think the two pieces of the ways that I would say it out loud, although you said it just fine, but my version of it would be number one, I think you always have to. So, Kendra, because you're so analytical, like if somebody sends you an email, you're going to sit down and like pour over that and interpret that and what that means. But if you're just sending the data and you're not giving any kind of explanation, um, 75% of your clients have no idea what that means, and therefore they're getting frustrated. So for you, you feel like you're doing them a huge service by spending the time putting all of that together. And for them, it's just more blah, 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 blah. So I think adding in the call or at a minimum, like a personal check-in via text to say like, hey, Kendra, this is Troy. I sent you an email yesterday and I just wanted to check in and see what you thought about it, see if it makes sense to jump on a call. I think the A plus is what Daniel's doing, where he's actually physically calling them. I actually I've gotten away from it a little bit, but it's something that I'm talking to Allison about really diving back into at a high level again. And that is like actually doing 2 calls a week. I would actually, Daniel, my advice to you would be to move your Friday message to Thursday for only your own sake. Because if you send them something on Friday, then you're getting a call on Saturday morning to talk about it. If you send it on Thursday afternoon, then you're getting a call on Friday morning to talk about it. Now, maybe your schedule makes Saturday the easier time, but I'm always thinking about like, how do I try to create a schedule that works for me? And if you think you're going to send information, they're going to ask questions either the same day or the following day. I always like to do things on Thursday instead of Friday. Um, but those would be the two things that I would say, Kendra. But also, I do not want to take anything away from the fact that you're crushing it. And you're exactly right that you probably had 2 people fire you last year, and maybe you only did 20 some transaction. I don't know what your numbers are, so forgive me if I'm offending you because you did like 70 last year. But no matter the more business you do, the more clients you aren't going to jive with. And so the cool thing is that if somebody fires you and you have 20 transactions, it hurts a lot less than when you have 2 in contract and somebody fires you. So I would say good job. Don't beat yourself up. It's part of growth. The fact that you're at 18 pendings is freaking awesome. And now that you've stretched that far, you'll never go back to the way you were before. Now you know that it can be done. And so your mental ability to do it is so much higher than what it was just a couple months ago. So great job. Anybody else have anything? I love this. I could do this all day. So I'm willing to stay on for a few extra minutes. No, you guys are good. Awesome. Leverage does not suck, by the way. I don't know what the rest of that comment said, but take it
I
back.
just mean because nobody can replicate these calls for me. Like I
No,
have to
so here's
call.
what you need to do though. Your assistant needs to send an email. I would also encourage you to send emails on, I send them on Wednesday, actually. I'm not opposed to Monday, but I send mine on Wednesday and then just say Troy's going to reach out to you tomorrow. And then
So
I
I
just
do.
set aside a time to call them.
So my homes.com analytics goes out on Monday, and then I follow that up with a personal email, like digging into that. Like if something was really important, or let's say they had 4 showings over the weekend, I'm including the feedback in the follow-up email. Um,
On Monday also?
yes, after the
Okay.
stats go out, because I get that too, and then I kind of regurgitate and add what's important from that report and send a subject line follow up to homes.com listing report.
Okay. So my advice would be to send all the listing reports to you and have your assistant build one email that includes the data and your opinion about the data, all in one email. The other thing that I do, and again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I set up a search um, for like a normal house in a neighborhood, but if it's rural, I'll do larger, like for the general price range and area. And then I screenshot that search, the list view that shows like, and I sort it by status change date. So it'll have like all the price adjustments at the top, all the pendings at the top, and it goes over the market data as a whole that's comparable to their property over the last 30 days. So they're getting that every week from me. But what that does is sometimes people can feel like all of their friends are selling quickly, even though they live in Dublin in a $550,000 house, their friend. But then their house is like a rural property an hour outside of Columbus, where the market doesn't sell in 4 days on average. And so I've found this is like a lot of errors on my part over 22. It'll be 22 years. Can you believe that, Kendra? Were you like in diapers when I got my license? Um, but lots of mistakes and lots of like upset days, like it sounds like you might be having today, that got me to this place. But I think showing them what their neighbors are doing is often, it's either makes it obvious that you need to make a big change from a price perspective, or it calms them down to the fact that every other house in their neighborhood didn't sell last weekend either. And then I also include showing time data that shows the same thing. So if I have a house that's listed for 500 in Worthington, I'm sending the showing time report that shows the total showings between 400 and 600 over the last 7 days. So they can compare that to what they got. Thanks, Daniel. But those are just a couple things that I would recommend tweaking. But I think overall, you're doing amazing and you're doing 99% more than the average agent. So don't beat yourself up too bad. She's like either crying or talking to her seller already. So, all right, I'll see you guys. Anybody else have anything? Fawn, you've been quiet today. You're good.
Well, I didn't want to start it since we ran so long. I mean, if you push me, I do have one thing. I'm
All right,
worried.
just remember this is being recorded. I guess I should have said that before
No,
Kendra
you can record
spilled
me.
her beans, but
I
It's
have a
okay.
listing in the Knolls that's,
okay.
but the seller is getting a bonus from their work if they gave a year notice. So they cannot leave. Basically, they have to be here till September 1st. And, ideally, it'd be better if we hit the market before July. But because of possession, I can't guarantee that, a cash buyer is going to come in. So I just
So
wondered
the
your thought.
seller, can I ask some more questions?
Absolutely.
So the seller's getting a work bonus.
To give a 1 year notice. So September 1st of 2026 is their last day of work. So they won't be
Okay.
moving before that. And they want extended possession to move.
So the biggest, my two questions would be, Fawn, like, thanks for having me over. So let me ask you a question. If you had to choose between living here until September 1st and possibly getting less money for your house, or selling during the best time of the year to sell, but having to move to an Airbnb, which option would you pick?
Yeah, she picked the bonus. We sat down in January. Her
She
bonus,
picked the bonus.
yep.
No, but she can still get the work bonus and live in an Airbnb.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
So you're assuming that moving twice is more important than getting more money. But if she could get, let's call it $20,000 more for her house, would it be worth it to live in an Airbnb for 6 weeks and finish out work? Or maybe she's like, hell no, I'm getting such a great bonus at work that, I'm completely fine if I lose a little bit of money. I just want the ability. So let's put it on the mark. Like, let's wait until July to put it on the market, because there's a point of diminishing return, right? Like, you want
Yeah.
to get the most money by listing in June, but if you have to find a buyer that's a cash buyer that can wait until September 5th to move in, um, then you might not want to. But I do agree, Kendra. Priced right, and the Knolls may get that quick cash offer. I don't disagree. By the
No,
way, you should send me the details because is it a ranch?
it is not a ranch.
Oh, dang
But
it.
it does have
Okay.
the primary bedroom is on the first floor, but it's
Okay.
not a
I need
ranch.
a ranch, but
Yeah.
maybe I was going to solve your problem because I have a buyer that could accommodate a September 1st closing that would buy in the Knolls in a second.
Yeah, no, I think, it's a desirable area. So there are those chances, but I can't guarantee them that.
The
Yeah.
other option, oh, Kendra's got one, but the other option is office exclusive. Uh, I
So
would
I had them.
definitely do the
That's
office exclusive.
that's part of my listing, like my listing appointment, and so they signed that. Um, they're hung up on. I just wanted to take a couple pictures to be able to post it in there, and then obviously, if somebody wanted to see it in our office, it would be seen. And so I discussed that with them, and they're just hung up on. They just keep saying they want to do a couple more things, a couple more things, a couple more things to the house before they want to do that. So I have this office exclusive sitting there, and again, I might be able to solve the problem with that. I just don't know
Yeah.
because they haven't
No,
let me yet.
and again, I think the biggest mistake that I see agents making these days is they're trying to be the decision maker. Like we feel so much responsibility around like making that decision for them, meaning like if they're not going to make the most amount of money, like somehow it's going to reflect poorly on you. And I do think that sometimes we push people into things that aren't important to them because we think our job is to get them the most money. So even when it comes to the picture thing, every time there's something that they're not doing that you think they should, you should just say, you know what, Fawn, I just need to have like a quick 2 minute conversation with you because I might have misunderstood or assumed something. Like I was trying to push you to get on the market and sell by June because that's when you can get the most money. But I feel like you're pushing back on that conversation. And so I just want to make sure we're on the same page. If you're on the market by the third week of June, you have a much better chance of realizing the highest price of the year. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is that to you? And if they say it's a 9, then say, okay, let me ask it a different way. If you had to move before September 1st into temporary housing and put your stuff in storage and you could still get that higher price, how important would it still be to get that higher price? And they might say a 5. And so then you just say, okay, so what I hear you saying is that if I can figure out a way to get you an offer now, but also allow you to live there until September 1st, that's way more important than getting the absolute highest price if we don't get that offer in the short term and they're going to say yes or no and then you're going to proceed accordingly. But I think sometimes we create this friction between us and our clients by like continuing to push this thing that may and then she may come back and say no, price is absolutely the most important thing and you're right to push her, and maybe she understands and she's just being a pain. But I think always re-asking that question to make sure that you're on the same page is a really good thing to get used to doing.
And I love that you say that. We're sitting down first week of June. So I
Sweet.
swung by their house and said, let's revisit this. And they agreed to the first week of June before I leave town. So I
I
definitely
would
plan on
recommend
having this.
pushing them before that
Okay. Okay.
because the first week of June makes trying to list by the third week of June very
Tough.
stressful.
Yep.
So I would just say, I was thinking about our appointment. And just given that pictures have to happen and this has to happen and all this stuff has to happen. And plus, if you're going out of town too,
Yep.
like be a little selfish and tell them, like, I'm going to be going out of town. I think it's going to be better if we could just sit down. Again, I only need like 15 or 20 minutes to go through a couple of these things. Bring the showing sheet that shows, what time of year the showings happen, and then bring the market sheet that shows, what the buyer activity looks like throughout the year and just put the data in front of them and say, in a perfect world, this is exactly what happens, but you're the boss. Like, that's my favorite line. When it comes to pricing, I'm like, I've been in the business for this long. This is where I think it needs to price because a buyer's willing to pay what a buyer's willing to pay, but we also have to pay attention to appraisal. But I say at the end of the day, as long as it's reasonable, if you're willing to sit on the market for a couple weeks trying this higher price, here are the pluses and minuses of that. But you're the boss. I said, I have the easy job. I just have to share the information. You have the tough one. You have to make the decision.
That's awesome, Troy. That's awesome.
And then you take all the pressure because I feel like as agents, we carry so much pressure around the success or failure. And certainly, do I freak out and lose sleep sometimes over listings that don't sell? Absolutely do. Like, I'm not, like, don't take that away from me, that from this conversation. But I do think over the years, I've learned our job is to give them the information, give them even advice, but our job is not to make the decision for them.
That's great advice. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Well, you guys are rock stars for staying on this long. Tracy might have been having conversations the whole time, but I still appreciate her. And Andrea too. Andrea, next time you need to show your face. I miss you.
There you
Oh, there it
go.
is.
You're catching me in my recliner at home.
That's
Don't
awesome. I
judge.
love it.
Thanks
All
for
right, guys. Well, I'm gonna jump off, but thank you guys for jumping on and reach out anytime. See
Bye.
ya.
Thanks, guys.